Well, earlier I spoke to Peter Cook. He was a Royal Marine officer for more than 20 years and has taken part in counter-terrorism and anti-piracy operations on the high seas. He now runs a maritime security consultancy which deals with, among other things, how to deal with attacks from pirates and anti-terrorism operations at sea. I asked him how a commander should have approached this operation.
He would have very limited resources to get on board. He would therefore want to concentrate the force on the deck as quickly as possible and then take control of the ship. So they were probably landing as close as they could to the bridge so they can get onto the bridge, take control of the ship, and then bring other forces alongside to stabilise the situation from small boats or the other naval vessels that were around at the time.
So let's look at what actually happened. We're I think, in a helicopter above a helicopter.
Yeah.
And what are we looking at, do you think?
We're looking at the deck here, and this was probably one of the few areas that they could actually land a force onto. The bridge is a wee bit
back here,
up forward there.
Let's look at what happens when they land then. Here they are coming down the rope. Now what's happened here?
Well, what's happened here is the party here have dragged the rope away. So the first man down is not caught up, but he can see that he's going straight into a hornet's nest. He hasn't been able to land where he wants to. And his whole
concentration is hanging onto the rope. No longer any question of arming himself against what's down below.
No.
Let's move it and see what happens here.
So he goes down and is very quickly overwhelmed by the people on the deck. You then see more men coming down more quickly. But again, they're being overwhelmed extremely quickly.
Now, what is this guy? What has he got here? What is this thing?
It doesn't look like any other Israeli weapon that I can find. It looks more like a paint gun. Now, that could be because they wanted to scare and stun the people on board.
A paint gun would be throwing out little balloons of paint which would splat onto the victim.
Yes, it's a pellet of paint. It would effectively, it would sting very much, but it would shock the individual, wouldn't harm them long term, and would allow these guys to gain the initiative so that they could gain control of the ship.
Well, I mean, you're an erstwhile Royal Marine. Is this the sort of equipment you'd go onto a vessel like this with?
I wouldn't want to.
No. Right, let's move on to the next one. Okay, now what's going on here?
You can see the main part of his upper body, upper torso, is protected by a life jacket, which would prevent the paint rounds getting through and hurting him. And his face is covered by a respirator mask so that he can see what's happening, but if the paintball hits him, he's still going to be able to operate and won't be distracted.
How come then in this operation of paint guns, obviously there was live ammunition as well because the captain said so on the radio, how come 10 people died?
That's very hard to tell at this moment in time. However, I would imagine that the primary weapon may well have been some form of gun that they were using to disable and distract rather than kill, but that each of them would have had a secondary weapon, which would have been a pistol, and once they started being overwhelmed and effectively thinking that their lives were in threat or were being threatened, they would then use that to protect themselves.
Peter, your day job is in fact to advise people largely to protect against piracy. Not a great deal of difference between these two operations. You've got alien people coming onto a ship on the high seas. Is it legal?
As far as this ship is concerned, it is, it's flagged by the Comores, and therefore when the commandos go on board, normally what would happen is this would be regarded as state property of the Comoros Islands, and therefore it would come under their jurisdiction.
An Indian Ocean entity which is presumably just a flag of convenience, hardly the best to carry out a major international inquiry.
Absolutely right. It would be very difficult.